Hello, I'm Peter Martin again. Thank you for asking me to share a thought for the week with you. Talking today a bit about Meister Eckhart, who spanned the 13th to the 14th century. He was a Dominican priest. He lived in what we now call Germany, and he was a mystic. Like many mystics, he was regarded with some suspicion by the established church and was indeed charged with heresy before he died. Mystics, as I understand it, rely on an inner voice, sometimes over and against the demands and the powers of scripture and of tradition. You don't apparently need to be weird to be a mystic, but it does probably help if you're willing to pay the price involved for thinking and living a bit outside the box. Eckhart was, as I say, a Dominican priest. He wasn't a poet, but two modern scholars, Mark Burrows and John Sweeney, are and have used his work as an inspiration for some deceptively simple, non-rhyming verses. Here is one that I very much hope will strike a chord for you in a time when we have a cold and somewhat inhospitable January to cope with. Great light. There is a very great light, the scripture says. For when wisdom comes into the minds, when a soul finally comes to rest from its passions and concerns, there also comes a quiet silence. As the soul rests from its spinning with new understanding. I hope that struck a warm spot for you. But it's all very well seeking for silence, but maybe you have a hive mind, like a beehive, constantly buzzing, constantly busy. Maybe, objectively speaking, you really do lead a busy life, or your life is in a very complex phase with many demands from many directions. Or maybe like many of us, maybe you seek shelter quite consciously from maybe the deeper and bigger things of life by resting in what the poem calls life's passions and concerns. In these situations, the quiet silence referred to is hard to achieve and sometimes seemingly impossible. But it is only seemingly impossible. It is not impossible unless we suffer from the kind of greed from which God seems to quietly withdraw and wait outside in the vestibule. That kind of greed says, I want everything and I want it now, and I know best about when I need it. Seeking after silence, I was a Quaker for 15 years and found it very hard to be in what they call a gathered silence. Nowadays, and for a similar length of time, I've attempted to practice mindfulness, which, among other things, seeks to empty the mind of thoughts so that it can, our bodies, ourselves, we can appreciate what it is just to be who we are in our body at that moment. Now, I have to tell you, after, again, about 10, 12, 15 years of doing this, I don't know how long, I feel it's a real achievement if after 20 minutes practice, I find I've had a single minute in which that peace, that silence is experienced. Or maybe it's just 30 seconds. But I have come to see that 30 seconds or a minute maybe as a pearl of great price. This time when heaven is available, when I'm joined to the earth and the earth is joined to the universe and the universe is joined with God. I realize now that I expected too much from my varied efforts to begin with, and perhaps for a long time. A little silence was available. Now, sometimes in those brief moments, I think, well, all I lack is present then. And it is enough. I have a very blunt friend from Birmingham who loves me enough to be direct with me sometimes. She once wrote to me with a very brief message. The card she sent said, "Settle the less." She was right. For in that less, when I can see and hear and reverberate with life, I know that this less is plenty. The greed, I'm afraid, hasn't altogether receded, but I have learned to value those moments. So maybe we have, like the Buddhists, to surrender some of our ambition. And indeed, Meister Eckhart's Book of Secrets, from which our poem came, has a subtitle. This subtitle says, Meditations on Letting Go and Finding True Freedom. For me, those rare, precious moments when anxiety and control fall away, in those moments, I do manage momentarily to do what Richard Rohr describes as letting God be God. Imagine having a glimpse of a God who is more than a projection of ourselves, or indeed a projection of our society and its values. So May we encourage perseverance, eventually perhaps finding a moment's deep silence beyond thought, valuing it and prizing it, however brief it is, then letting it go, content that one has nearly seen, or seen for a moment, what Isaiah described as the Lord high and lifted up, beyond oneself, found in the still small voice, in a tuning in, a moment's pause, a second in which to wonder, to experience awe, rather than ego. How pleasant it is to leave ego behind, if only for a second, and to replace it with wonder. Or to quote Mark's Gospel, this moment is like a grain of mustard seed, small, secret, and powerful. Shall we end our time together by saying part of the psalm, a very small part of it, and here we are. What I suggest we do is we say it slowly and meditatively, just as it is written here. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and be still. Be. Goodbye.